I disconnected 10% of my phone's battery to conserve the remaining energy, just in case I needed to travel further by metro and a couple more stops on the bus. I squeezed myself to the window, observing the gloomy autumn scenery, a bridge, a shopping center, and the old theater. The eyes were tired of this landscape long ago. What about others? Some passengers were dozing in their seats, while others were engrossed in their phones, both sitting and standing, heads bowed as they scrolled through social media feeds or watched videos. The bus tilted on turns, making people grip the handrails tighter, their eyes glued to the screens. Headphones shielded them from external sounds. But what's wrong with watching something or listening to music on the way? It's a good way to relax and take a break from everyday worries. Mobile devices have made travel time more interesting. There's no need to judge anyone here, but it was pleasant to feel unique, the only one who emerged into reality. I stood and watched everyone from the side, a tall guy in a hood like a lamppost bending over a flickering screen, a sleeping girl with expensive noise-canceling headphones, a teenager typing and recording voice messages. None of them were truly present here. The geek in me reveled in this thought. The bus approached a stop, and a woman slipped in from the side, hitting my backpack. A commotion ensued, and when the doors opened halfway, the bus emptied. I began to look for an empty seat. Everyone settled quickly, leaving only one beside the sleeping girl with headphones. I wanted to sit there, but my attention was diverted by a strange man who jumped in as the doors closed. He looked as if a car had run over him. The decent suit was stained with dirt. The last button on the jacket dangled on threads, and there was a hole on the shoulder of the crumpled shirt. Black patterned lines, like tire tracks, adorned the disheveled attire. The man's gray hair was matted with dirt, and crimson streaks were caked on his temples. Surprisingly, he smiled, and no one else paid him any attention. Only I observed him in astonishment. Where could he have encountered such misfortune? He glanced at me as the only one who took notice, bulging his eyes and nodding as if acknowledging an acquaintance. The peculiar passenger navigated through the crowd, shaking his dirty jacket at them. Passengers compliantly moved aside, absorbed in their phones, oblivious to everything around. Yes, I would have noticed someone like him immediately, although how would I know how many peculiarities escape my notice when I'm engrossed in the internet? The man turned his back to me, revealing traces of wheels on his jacket and a battered head. Was this some kind of masquerade, or would he be able to walk if a car had run over him? His hands, oddly twisted or so it seemed due to the wrinkled suit, proceeded to the spot I had chosen, and he sat next to the sleeping girl. Now the dirty man was in the line of sight of the standing passengers, but they still paid him no attention, not bothering to scrutinize the details. As the bus turned, the head of the sleeping girl fell onto the shoulder of the strange man. She turned in her sleep, adjusting herself more comfortably, and for some reason I felt uneasy, as if it were me lying with my cheek on his shoulder. The man ran his fingers through the dirty hair, untangling the stiff strands, and looked at me again. Smiling wider, he displayed his red gums. His front teeth were broken. The bizarre passenger nodded, grinned, and whispered something in an unclear language, as if uttering words backward, sending shivers down my spine. The bus reached a stop, prompting me to rush to the subway. I didn't witness what happened next, only imagining how the girl woke up and screamed in fear. Descending into the underground, I pondered about the man. Perhaps he found amusement in walking around dressed like that, waiting for someone to take notice. A deranged performance artist showcasing the detached reality. He roamed all day like a phantom, or perhaps he was a phantom among people with no mutual interest. As I walked in the crowd, it was like being one of many. People flowed through the crossing, shoulders brushing against each other. Everyone was an individual, yet no one cared about others. We moved together, oblivious to one another, each immersed in their own thoughts. Interesting, I thought, shifting my focus to contemplations on the peculiarities of collective behavior and momentarily forgetting the man I saw on the bus. In the train carriage, luck eluded me again. Every seat was taken. Exhausted, I hung on a handrail, and everyone was still engrossed in their phones. A girl with an e-reader, an elderly man with a paper book. No one glanced at anyone. I, too, felt like a ghost to people immersed in virtuality. The well-trodden rails indicated the approach of the train, and as the doors opened and parted, another peculiar figure squeezed into the carriage. The face, of uncertain age, was swollen, gray and wet, as if emerging from a swamp. The clothes were damp, eyes bulging from swollen lids, skin wrinkled on the palms. He dripped and left wet traces behind. No one paid attention to him, and the carriage filled with the scent of dampness and aquatic plants. Those who stood close to that person seemed to have noticed, judging by the wrinkles on their noses, but they paid zero attention to the source. The drowned man in the subway car, in such a state, could have been swooning somewhere in a river with a bloated abdomen, rather than walking among the living. What day is it today? It's still a long way to that holiday, and September hasn't ended yet. If this is makeup, why make it so repulsive? And the stench fills the entire carriage. The swollen man noticed my curiosity. He opened his mouth between his lips, inflated, and burst like a bubble. He mumbled something indistinct and started moving towards me, pushing people aside. They only frowned but didn't voice their disapproval. Shouldn't someone have looked at him? I got scared, stepping back cautiously, bumping into someone's shoulder as if hitting an old carpet. Dust clouded my face. "Sorry," I exclaimed before checking who I had collided with. At night, the sky whispered into my ear slowly and indistinctly. I ran my palm over my face and glanced at my fingers. It wasn't dust but soot. Next to me stood a person covered in horrific burns, eyeless, toothless, with some areas charred to the core, while from the other end approached the drowned man. Who are these demons, and why are they intruding upon me? I almost screamed, but suddenly, a path to salvation opened before me as the doors parted ways. It didn't matter which station it was. The main thing was to escape. In panic, I almost leaped over heads, driven by an uncontrollable fear, out of the subway. As I ascended, a sense of calmness enveloped me. The cool autumn air refreshed my mind, dispelling the panic. The swampy stench and the smell of burning gave way to the fragrance of fallen leaves. After the subway, even the urban air felt clean, washed by the rain that had fallen while I was underground. Walking would take a while. The minibuses would stop running soon. Still, I could catch a tram to the bus station. If needed, I could hop off immediately. I already understood that this evening was special. Today, all the residents of hell had come out for a stroll on the surface. One should carry a portable charger and not detach from the phone like everyone else. Then there would be no problems. The tram bell rang. I hopped into the open doors, scanning for any strange passengers. There were plenty of them. A granny with dark holes on her forehead, cheek, and neck, resembling rat burrows. It seemed a gray tail flashed in one of the holes. Another granny held a ragged bag. To my left, a barefoot girl in pajamas embraced herself, blue from the cold, with frost on her lips, her eyes cunning as if plotting something. The bald man next to me, seemingly normal from the top, had a zipper running from the nape down to the skin, as if wearing someone else's appearance. Seeing them, I immediately wanted to jump off the tram, but I was too late. The doors closed, and we started moving. The bald one with the zipper on his neck turned towards me and whispered, his head turned into a lamp. He didn't stutter or slur. His words were clear but devoid of any meaning. The man looked at me expectantly, awaiting a response. My hands became sweaty, yet remained cold. I squeezed through to another exit, brushing against a random woman's elbow, and said, "Excuse me, could you not for just a second?" The young man, without even looking at me, replied curtly, "Yeah, don't push." But she was too busy texting. Strange people stared at me, but I tried not to pay attention, pretending to be like everyone else. I took out my switched-off phone, gazed into the dark screen, and saw my frightened face. Finally, the stop. I wanted to jump out, but it was impossible. An incredibly enormous person squeezed into the tram, resembling a hippopotamus in shape, and layers of fatty tissue covered his body. Wide cheeks and thick lips trembled from the jolts. Small eyes, like two beads in a sea of fat, stared directly at me. The voice of the gigantic person sounded deep and loud, but no one in the tram could hear him. I walked backward, avoiding the strange people reaching out to me. The bald man's skin hung from the tips of his fingers like gloves that were too big. The granny with rat holes on her face winked at me. The frozen girl smiled. The enormous man lumbered behind me, pushing passengers aside. They obediently yielded their seats, not protesting. He moved slowly and clumsily, as if his body was too heavy for such movements. The tram bell rang for salvation, and the stop came. Several people got off with me, their faces indifferent and tired, ignoring those walking among us. I envied them. I longed to return to the routine carelessness where everything around is mundane and stale, and life is confined to the phone. How to tune into this wave? Just a couple of stops until the bus station, and then the 122 minibus home. I turned on my phone. The battery was at 7%. Well, it would last for a while. I plugged in my earphones, turned the music to full volume, and walked with the crowd straight to the station. Like everyone else, I saw no one, noticed no one. I found my minibus. It was waiting for me with open doors. I sat in a solitary seat far away, so no one would attempt to pass money through me. I pulled the hood over my eyes, hugged my backpack, and as we started moving, someone loomed over me. I saw nothing. I was listening to music. What a terrible smell, as if something rotted, stale fish mixed with rotten eggs. Someone hung over me, saying something. A piercing voice cut through the music. "We're going somewhere unknown." I can't raise my head and look. The song abruptly stopped. The phone finally died. I was breathing too loudly and excitedly, but I continued pretending that I was just listening to music. Someone pulled my hood down and yanked the earphone from my ear. "Find your own light." "Yeah, roast him, daughter." From this voice, my head rang, and I couldn't hide my gaze any longer. I looked up, and there stood a woman. She was so tall that she had to bend almost in half to reach my face. Blue bruises covered her cheeks instead of blush, and golden crowns shone in her mouth. I slid onto the floor, crawled between the rows, got up, and shouted to the driver, "Stop." The strange woman laughed, tapping her golden teeth. Now, passengers and I were no longer noticed. The inhabitants of hell dragged me into their reality. Only the driver listened to me, stopped the minibus, and I tumbled out onto the street. I sprinted across the intersection on a red light in nervous desperation. I wanted to grab people by their jackets, steal their phones from behind the circle, and ask them to notice me. But to hell with them. Let them go wherever they were going. I just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. It was dark. Puddles splashed under my feet. My shoes got soaked. I want to put my phone on the charger in my kitchen, and then take a shower and crawl under the blanket to erase this day. Concrete steps, an empty platform. The train doors slammed shut behind me, almost catching my backpack on both sides. Empty carriages on the right and left. Cracked paint, worn handles, the smell of tobacco and dampness, and not a single person. I was alone in the entire train. I decided to stay in the vestibule in this small space. It felt safer, easier to watch the doors, and know in advance which way to escape. But someone appeared next to me, seemingly materializing out of thin air. Someone resembling a human but tall and slender, with long limbs and sharp claws. His face, neck, and arms were covered in yellow scales that glistened in the light of the lamp on his head. He had 2 sharp lines on his head, resembling lizard spines. His round yellow eyes with vertical pupils stared at my forehead. It seemed like he could see my thoughts. In the pocket of his demon's old-fashioned brown suit and checkered shirt, he leaned on a carved cane with a round handle. This passenger was either trying to mimic a human or belonged to a distant past. His hissing voice tickled my ears, and the demon exuded a sharp, sour smell reminiscent of burnt matches. I was tired of being scared, tired of being surprised. What did they want from me with this horrible charade? They looked like the heroes of nightmares, terrifying, and uttering incomprehensible words. I stared into the yellow eyes of the demonic being, and suddenly, an idea struck me. Respond with something equally senseless, an inherently unattainable task. Drink the sunset from a tea box, I timidly uttered. The spikes on the yellow man's head stood up. He smiled, nodded, and quickly losing interest in me, entered an empty carriage. It worked. We seemed to have exchanged passwords. So, this is what I need to do. Respond with impossible tasks. I was relieved. Now I knew how to repel demons. In the night sky, I could invent as many of these tasks as I wanted. All my thoughts were now composed of them. Stop the wind with a knot, I ordered. Reverse the yellow leaves, I instructed. I wanted to think about which station to get off at, but I couldn't. Why should I even get off at a station? Why did I board this train in the first place? Traversing tunnels of memory, I couldn't recall my address or even my own name. The wheels clattered against the windows. Darkness enveloped me. And where was I headed on such a night? I needed to go back home, but where was my home? I was horrified that I couldn't remember where my home was. I clenched my temples with my hands. This shouldn't be happening. No matter how much I wandered through memory tunnels, I couldn't remember my address or my own name. Some kind of garbage occupied my mind. Initially, their language sounded unintelligible. Then I began to understand, and now I think like them. I became one of them, drawn into a meaningless world where the whole life is a road. Now, I am also a strange person who must move from transport to transport, uttering senseless things to anyone who pays attention. Because I won't be able to say anything else. Any cry for help will turn into a stream of nonsense. What will happen to me now? A frightening unknown, emptiness. Outside the window, darkness. The glass like a mirror, my reflection crossed out by a half-erased stencil warning not to lean. What an unpleasant and unfamiliar face. Was this me? I can't remember. Darkness and the rhythmic rattle of wheels. My journey will never end. My home is nowhere to be found.